The mess hall hummed with the low murmur of tired voices and the soft scrape of utensils against metal trays. The lights overhead flickered faintly, warned from the unrelenting vibrations of a distant war still raging somewhere in the void. The alien soldiers, veterans of countless campaigns, sat slumped at their tables, armor scorched, scales chipped, and eyes hollow. There was no victory in their expressions despite their recent triumph. Just exhaustion, the kind that seeps into bones and refuses to leave. At one corner of the hall, separated by just enough space to make him stand out, sat the human. He was unremarkable at first glance. Average height, average build, his skin pale against the harsh glow of the overhead lights. His uniform bore no glittering insignia of rank or prideful banners of conquest, only the weathered fabric of someone who had seen more than his share of violence. A thin scar traced along his jaw, and a thin line of stubble-marked days without rest. His posture was unnaturally calm. He ate slowly, deliberately, as though he had all the time in the galaxy. The aliens stole glances at him. They tried not to, but their curiosity gnawed at them. The human was an anomaly, a strange creature who sat in silence among legends of war and bloodshed. His frail form seemed out of place here, dwarfed by towering insectoids whose hardened carapaces gleamed with fresh scars, and reptilian warriors whose sinewy muscles could crush stone. Whispers threaded through the hall. Asterisk. How does it not break? Asterisk. Asterisk. It doesn't even look tired. Asterisk. Asterisk. Is it true they come from the Deathworld? Asterisk. A four-armed alien soldier finally broke the tension, his mandibles clicking as he slammed his fist onto the table. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot, pulling every gaze to him and then to the human. You! The alien growled, his voice chittering with irritation and lingering disbelief. How do you sit so still? After what we've seen? What we've endured? The human paused mid-bite, chewing methodically before setting his utensil down. He looked up, and for a moment, his eyes caught the light, an unsettling mix of cold and fire. I've seen worse, he said simply. The alien snarled, frustration brimming. Worse? You! The others shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring in agreement. What could a creature like you possibly know of war? Of true hardship? The human didn't answer right away. He wiped his mouth with the edge of his sleeve, his movements unhurried, as if savoring the tension that crackled through the air. You think humans are soft, he said finally, his voice low but carrying across the room. That we don't belong here, on ships like this, in wars like yours. The alien soldier leaned forward, challenging him. Do you deny it? Look at you. You're fragile. You've no claws, no natural armor. And your world, what they say of it? He hesitated, voice dropping almost reverently. They say it's cursed. A death world. For the first time, the faintest smile tugged at the human's lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It was something colder, sharper, something that made the aliens uncomfortable. Death world, the human repeated softly, as if the word amused him. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lightly on the tabletop. You want to know about my world? About what it means to grow up on a place where everything wants to kill you? The alien soldier narrowed his eyes, his earlier frustration replaced now by something harder to name, curiosity laced with wariness. Tell us, he said. The mess hall fell silent. The murmurs died, and every gaze locked onto the human. Even those who had been disinterested now turned their heads, their expressions guarded but hungry for whatever it was he had to say. The human let the silence stretch a beat longer before he spoke, his voice calm, steady, but carrying the weight of something old and unshakable. Earth is no paradise. The storms alone will tear apart your homes if you're not prepared. The winters can freeze a man solid, and the summers will burn your skin to the bone. The seas are filled with creatures that can swallow you whole, and the forests. He paused, his eyes distant for a moment, as though staring into something only he could see. Let's just say you don't wander too far alone after dark. A sharp clicking rose from one corner of the room, an alien soldier muttering in disbelief. You exaggerate. No planet can be so cruel and still produce life. The human's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. And yet here I sit. The words landed like stones in water, rippling through the room. The alien soldier fell silent, lowering his gaze. You fight your wars on stable worlds, the human continued, his voice steady but carrying an edge now. You grow strong in systems where nature bends to your will. But Earth doesn't care about us. It never has. We're not the strongest creatures there. We're not the fastest or the fiercest. He paused, his smile returning faintly. But we endure. That's the one thing we're better at than anything else. Surviving. The aliens stared at him now, their skepticism cracking under the weight of his words. One soldier, his scales a dull gray from recent injuries, spoke up. But you're human. You have no weapons. No natural defenses. We don't need them, the human replied. Our ancestors didn't have claws or venom. So we picked up sticks and sharpened stones. When the cold came, we built fire. When the beasts hunted us, we learned to hunt them back. He leaned forward now, his voice lowering but growing somehow more intense. And when other humans tried to take what was ours, we fought them, too. Not because we wanted to, but because survival demands it. The mess hall seemed to shrink around them, the air thickening as the humans' words sank in. The aliens, veterans of countless wars, sat silently as if seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. Finally, the first soldier spoke again, his voice quieter, unsure now. And you think your Deathworld is worse than this? Worse than all we've endured? The human's gaze met his, unflinching. You think you've seen war, he said. You haven't seen Earth. The silence returned, heavier than before. The aliens looked at each other, the weight of the human's words pressing against them like gravity. The mess hall, which had been filled with the sounds of scraping trays and whispered conversations only minutes before, now held nothing but the quiet hum of the ship's distant engines. The human sat back, his expression unreadable, as if waiting for the next challenge. None came. The human's voice remained calm, yet it carried a weight that filled the room. You call my world a death world, he began, his tone almost conversational, as if discussing the weather. We call it Earth. It's a Class 12 death world by your standards, whatever that means to you. Where I'm from, it just means home. A murmur rippled through the aliens, mandibles clicking, scaled tails twitching. Class 12? The very term was enough to make their hardened faces darken with uncertainty. Class 12 meant chaos, uncontrolled, relentless, unlivable chaos. Such classifications were spoken of in grim tones, assigned to worlds they would never consider inhabiting, let alone surviving. Even the air? One of them muttered, more to himself than anyone. Yes, the human replied, catching the whisper. Even the air. He let the words hang there, enjoying the moment of disbelief that followed. You breathe too deep in the wrong places, and you die. Not from weapons, not from poison, but from the very world itself. Gases, toxins, diseases you can't see, can't fight. The alien soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The notion of a world where simply existing could kill you was foreign to them. On their planets, life was hard, but the rules were clear. The strongest survived, the weak perished. But Earth sounded like something else entirely. And that's just the air, the human continued. The oceans can swallow entire cities. Storms will strip your flesh if you don't find shelter. The ground itself will split open without warning and swallow you whole, burning from below. Lies, someone muttered, though their voice lacked conviction. Lies? The human echoed, his gaze locking onto the speaker. You think I'm lying? Have you ever stood on a fault line when the ground shakes so hard it breaks buildings like sandcastles? Have you seen the sky darken as fire rains from above? Do you know what it's like to run from walls of water taller than your ships? They didn't answer. The human's voice dropped, soft and steady, pulling them in. That's just nature on Earth. It doesn't care. It doesn't notice you. The winters freeze lake solid and make the air sharp enough to bite your lungs. The summers will burn you alive if you aren't careful. There are deserts where no rain falls for years, where heat ripples off the ground so fiercely it blurs reality itself. And the creatures. The word lingered, ominous, and Alien's spine stiffened. The creatures, he repeated. We're not the apex predators on our own world. Not naturally. We had to earn that. Because on Earth, there are beasts with jaws that can snap bones like twigs, and others so small you'd never see them coming until you're fevered and dying. Some kill you fast, others take their time, poison, venom, teeth, claws. You can die in an instant or over days. Earth doesn't care how you go, only that you will. Silence. The kind that felt heavy, as if the very air had thickened. One of the soldiers finally spoke, his voice laced with disbelief. And you survived this? The human's faint smile returned, that cold edge of amusement once again curling at the corners of his lips. I didn't survive it. I thrived there. We all did. That's why I'm here now. Because humans don't just endure death, we learn from it. The room felt smaller now. The alien soldiers, battle-tested, conquerors of countless planets, stared at the human as if seeing him for the first time. Their minds tried to process what he described, to reconcile it with the fragile creature sitting so calmly in front of them. You want a story? The human asked. He leaned forward, and the aliens unconsciously mirrored him, unable to help themselves. Fine. Let me tell you about my first winter in the mountains. They didn't move, didn't blink. I was young, barely out of school, and I thought I understood the cold. I didn't. His voice was low, steady, carrying the memory as though it still lingered just behind his eyes. We were climbing, pushing higher every day. Then the storm came. Snow so thick you couldn't see your own hands. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the cold. He exhaled, a faint breath of something that could have been a laugh. The cold steals everything. Your strength. Your focus. Eventually it starts whispering to you, telling you it would be easier to just lay down, close your eyes. They listened, transfixed. But you don't. You can't. Because if you stop moving, you die. And that's when they came, the real wolves. He let the word linger, watching the way their expressions shifted. They're not predators like you'd understand. They're patient. They don't rush in and fight you head on. They follow you, silent and invisible, their eyes just two glints in the darkness. And when you stumble, when you falter, they're there. Waiting. Watching. I had no weapons, no shelter. Just my hands and my mind. What did you do? One of them finally asked, his voice a whisper. I lit a fire. It wasn't much, just a spark, a flicker, but it was enough to keep the dark at bay. The wolves hate the fire. I kept it alive through the night, feeding it scraps of wood and whatever I could find. By dawn, they were gone, and I was alive. He leaned back, his eyes sweeping across the room. That's Earth. It doesn't hand you victory. It doesn't care how smart or strong you are. You survive because you refuse to die. You keep the fire burning, no matter what. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke, no one moved. The alien soldiers sat frozen, as though the humans' words had conjured the cold itself into the room. For creatures who prided themselves on strength and strategy, the notion of surviving such a world through sheer, stubborn will was both humbling and terrifying. Finally, the human's voice broke the stillness one last time. Strength isn't about being the biggest or the meanest. It's about being relentless. Earth taught us that. It's why we don't stop, no matter the odds. You wouldn't last a day on my world. None of them argued. For the first time, they believed him. One of the alien soldiers broke the silence, his voice tinged with incredulity and challenge. Surviving nature is one thing, human. It makes you tough, perhaps. But nature doesn't fight back the way an enemy does. We are warriors. We bleed for our victories. Tell us, what do you know of war? The human's expression shifted. The faint smirk faded, replaced by something harder, colder, a shadow that darkened his gaze. He let the question hang for a moment, his voice lowering when he finally spoke. If you think Earth is dangerous, You should see what happens when humans fight each other. The room, already still, seemed to hold its breath. War is in our bones, the human continued, his tone matter-of-fact, without pride or shame. It's older than our nations, older than our flags. We've fought over land, over resources, over ideas, and sometimes for reasons so stupid we don't even remember them anymore. And when we fight, the world itself becomes our enemy, because we make it so. The aliens stared, silent. The idea of fighting over such trivial things, of turning on their own species, was almost incomprehensible. But the human wasn't finished. Trench warfare. The words seemed to carry weight of their own. Do you know what it's like to dig yourself into the earth, to spend weeks in a pit of mud and blood, where death isn't a possibility but a promise? Explosions shatter the air day and night, the ground shakes, and the sky is choked with smoke. You don't eat. You don't sleep. You don't even think. You just survive, moment to moment. One alien muttered something in their own tongue, a prayer, maybe. The human ignored it. We've fought wars where men froze to death on icy plains, their bodies buried under snow before the next morning. Wars where the heat cooked them alive in their steel shells, and jungles swallowed them whole with disease and venom before a bullet ever touched them. Imagine fighting an enemy you can't see, snipers who take you from miles away, ambushes that come out of silence, traps buried where you step without even realizing you're dead. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of countless unseen battles. You think you're strong because you've survived wars with your claws and your ships? We fought wars with sticks when we had nothing else. Then we made swords. Then guns. Then bombs. And when that wasn't enough, we made weapons that could level cities in seconds. The aliens froze. A low murmur crept through the room like a current of unease. We've fought enemies stronger than us, smarter than us, with numbers that outmatched us 10-1. And yet we win. He let the word linger, sharp as a blade. Not because we're stronger. Not because we're faster. But because humans don't stop. When we're cornered, we fight harder. When we're outnumbered, we get smarter. And when the odds are hopeless, we adapt. He leaned forward slightly, the tension in his body barely restrained. There's a story about a unit, trapped deep behind enemy lines. Cut off. Outnumbered 100-1. They had no food, no water, and no hope of rescue. The enemy expected them to lay down their weapons and die quietly. But they didn't. The aliens hung on every word, their hardened faces reflecting something that might have been all. They scavenged. They dug traps. They used the terrain itself as a weapon. They turned the night into their ally, picking off their enemies one by one. And when the enemy sent a battalion to flush them out, they lured them into an ambush, wiped them out with their own explosives. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found that unit still alive, standing on a hill of their enemies dead. The aliens were silent now, no longer sneering at the humans' fragility. The descriptions painted a picture they couldn't shake, a species so violent and determined that even the impossible wasn't enough to stop them. How could such a violent, fragile species exist? One of them finally asked, his voice filled with disbelief and, for the first time, something resembling fear. How do you not destroy yourselves? The human's gaze flickered toward him, a faint ghost of a smile returning to his lips, but there was no humor in it. We nearly did. We came close, more times than I'd like to admit. Our wars burned cities, poisoned lands, and broke nations. There were times when it felt like we'd lost, that we'd pushed ourselves so far there was no coming back. The smile faded. But humans are stubborn. When we destroy, we rebuild. When we fail, we try again. We're not the strongest, and we're not the smartest, but we endure. Because survival isn't just about living another day. It's about making sure there's a tomorrow worth fighting for. The alien soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Everything they thought they understood about the humans sitting before them had been shattered, replaced by something they couldn't fully comprehend. A species without claws, without fangs, without armor, but somehow the most dangerous thing they had ever heard of. One alien whispered, as if afraid of the answer, "And if you turn that violence on the rest of us?" The human's eyes darkened, his voice steady and unnervingly calm. We don't start wars. Not anymore. We've learned the cost. But if someone brings war to us, if they force our hand, they learn why Earth is called a death world. He leaned back in his seat, his expression returning to that quiet calm, as if the weight of his words meant nothing to him. But the room around him had changed. The aliens no longer saw him as fragile. They no longer saw him as weak. They saw him for what he was, a survivor, forged in a world that gave no mercy and carried no pity. A silence fell once more, deeper and more profound than before. No one argued. No one scoffed. For the first time, they understood. Humans were terrifying not because they were born dangerous, but because they chose to fight, to endure, to survive, no matter the odds. The humans' words echoed in their minds like a prophecy. Asterisk. When the world burns, we rebuild. When the odds are hopeless, we fight harder. Asterisk. And they believed him. The human sat back for a moment, his gaze distant as if sifting through memories. You want to know what Earth truly taught us? I'll tell you one last story. The aliens leaned forward instinctively, their skepticism long replaced by uneasy curiosity. It was supposed to be a simple mission. Recon, nothing more. Our unit went in with limited supplies, no heavy equipment, and no way to call for help if things went sideways. And, of course, they did. The terrain was a labyrinth of jagged cliffs and forests so thick you'd swear daylight forgot them. Then came the enemy, ambushing us, cutting us off from any chance of retreat. When the dust settled, they thought we were dead. We thought we were dead. The aliens listened in silence, the tension in the room building like a coiled spring. We were stranded. The enemy held the high ground, resources were scarce, and the temperature dropped so low at night it froze the sweat on your skin. We had no food, no fire, and no reinforcements coming. By all logic, that should have been the end of us. And you know what we did? The question hung unanswered in the air. The human's voice hardened, sharper than before. We adapted. We scavenged weapons from our fallen enemies. We turned the very terrain that trapped us into our greatest weapon. They knew the land better, but we were smarter. We hid in caves, masked our heat signatures, hunted them in their own territory. One by one, we flipped the battlefield. By the end of that week, we were starving, broken, and frostbitten, but we were alive. And every last one of them was gone. He paused, as if the memory still lingered like a distant chill. The reports later said it was impossible, that we shouldn't have survived. But that's the thing about humans, we don't care about impossible. When the universe throws everything it has at us, we grit our teeth, we adapt, and we endure. The aliens exchanged glances, their postures rigid, their expressions conflicted. They were warriors, conquerors, but something about the humans' words gnawed at them. There was no bravado here, no arrogance, just an unshakable certainty that sent a chill down their spines. The human's voice softened now, though it lost none of its weight. Earth didn't give us strength in the way you'd think. It gave us struggle. Endless, relentless struggle. You grew strong in stability, in safety, where your worlds taught you control. But we— his eyes burned as they swept the room. We learned in chaos. We were forged in it. And chaos taught us to be stubborn, adaptable, unyielding. One of the aliens finally found his voice, though it trembled withal. You speak of survival, but it sounds like madness. How do you endure so much without breaking? The human let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, though his face remained solemn. You think we don't break? We do. We break. We bleed. We fall. But the lesson Earth teaches is simple: if you can't stand up again, you die. And humans, we don't die easy. That's why we thrive in places where no one else would. It's why we keep fighting long after anyone else would have given up. A silence fell again, but it was different this time, thick with something unspoken. The aliens, who had once looked at the human with smug amusement, now saw him differently. They saw not a fragile creature, but something worse, something that refused to die, that clawed its way out of the grave and came back stronger every time. One alien murmured under his breath, though the words carried across the room. I hope we never find ourselves on the wrong side of your wars. The human's lips curled into a faint smile, not cruel, but edged with knowing. He stood slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. If you do, you'll learn what we're really capable of. He glanced back at them, letting his next words sink in like stones into water. You think I'm impressive? You think this stubbornness is something special? I'm no one. I'm just a soldier. An average human. If you ever force us to unleash our best, I promise you, your wars will never be the same. The words hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. None of the aliens spoke, none dared to challenge him. They just sat there, silent and stunned, their minds turning over the implications of what they'd just heard. A Deathworlder, born from chaos and conflict, calling himself average. What then, they wondered, would humanity's best look like? The human turned and walked away, leaving the alien warriors alone with their thoughts. They had come to scoff at the strange, fragile species that called themselves human, but now they sat in awe and fear. None of their strength, none of their victories, compared to the relentless, terrifying resolve they had just witnessed. As the room grew quiet again, someone whispered softly, almost to themselves. Sometimes it's not the biggest or strongest who endure, but those who have weathered the fiercest storms. And the human? He was already gone. But the lesson remained, etched into the minds of every alien soldier who had heard him speak. Earth had not broken humanity. It had made them. And the galaxy would do well to remember that.